Great. So we can actually get this spacecraft up and moving. Welcome everyone to Short History of the World, our eighth class of the semester. And you're back from a break, at least as I see it. You've already been in class this week, but I haven't seen you for 2 weeks. So it's good to see all of you. And most importantly, it's great to see more students coming in person as well, because this really allows for us to have a true class. And um, we are fortunate as well to have students who are very engaged, like Alec, for example. He said early on that, it's kind of like the Greeks used to do this with the first academies underneath the Acropolis. They would meet in the grove, and there would be philosophers and others talking together and having really enlightened discussions. And that's exactly what I have been wanting to do with this class, is bring back that ancient atmosphere of real learning together, but adding the layer of 21st century technology onto it so that we can go forward in humanity, not allowing technology to dictate our future. The humans dictate the future. If we continue to go all remote with education, if there is more and more and more people relying on online platforms for everything that they do while they sit alone somewhere, we have a problem with humanity. Human beings will lose over time the ability to talk to each other, and more will be mediated by their machines. And in my estimation, if you want to see the best result of what that new human will look like, go no further than Elon Musk. He's all computer, all tech, and all money. But talk about a cold individual. Whoa. All machine, Elon Musk. And okay, let me stop for a second. And, just we're talking about the wealthiest person in the world right now, who owns a whole bunch of things, and he has thrown his support behind a person in the United States who has been criminally convicted of crimes and has more crimes waiting to be prosecuted. So just watch, please, what's unfolding in the United States next week in terms of history on the line. So let me just make sure I stay on focus here. We'll get there in a moment. We have so much to cover today, but in a way it's going to be a bit old school. I'm going to be coming back here and really engaging with our sources today to move through Awakenings of Power, Spells of Our God Kings, and a Greater World, because we've got to get to the conquest. At any rate, I just want to make sure everybody is connected properly. So here's what I'd like to do for our attendance. First, what is working well is if I just pass the microphone around and you say your name clearly, okay? And then just pass it, your full name clearly. So please go ahead and just keep going all the way around, okay?
I'm Mackenzie Doucet.
And for those of you online, Amber, Root, Alex, write your name in full in the live chat, okay? Keep going so we can do both at once.
Sham Cannon.
Way to go, okay?
Tala Iqbal.
Good. Here we go.
Zahin Chowdhury.
Lovely.
Raven C.
Good.
Justin Bourne.
Yeah.
Joseph Kentuba.
Josiah Strong.
The prophet. Well, anyways, Alec.
Alec Mann.
Yeah.
Max Bell.
Oh, it's Max, right? Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so let's keep going here. This way, remember how it works. All of you who are in person, you put your question at the end, you get your 3. You know the drill, right? Okay. So, but I need to remember everybody, and this is working, okay?
Logan McFarlane.
Thank you, Logan. Yep, keep going.
Sisir Rakhal.
Nice. Good. And everybody is here
Please
online.
raise your hand.
Jackson, put your name in full in the live chat.
Yash Raut.
That way I know you're here.
Chinmay Singh.
All right,
Kyle Holt.
good. I'm talking to the onliners too, so keep going. Jackson, put your name in full, please, in the live chat. That's
My name is Yang Fang.
okay, great. Excellent. So I think I can let our great tech support today go. Thanks a lot, okay, for troubleshooting with this. Yeah, we're good. We're good. Okay. Mayrene's not here today. She's sick. She has a little bit of a cold and some sore throat, so she said she's not going to come. And I said, no problem. You know, don't pass it around. But we're good. Generally, we're good. I was lucky this morning when I came in, even though I had no Mayrene. No teacher was in here before me today, which meant I could come in and really work on some tech stuff and not have to troubleshoot too much. So we can actually really get going. All right, so we know who's on board. This is working now, and everybody will get their proper participation marks. Before I start today, do you have any questions that you would like to bring to my or the class's attention? Anything that's on your mind that you would like to address? And otherwise, I think we're going to be able to get going, because essentially I'm going to be sitting here today lecturing with books, the map. There will be videos that we will watch as well, but I'm not going to be able to present the slides that I normally do. It's just too complicated. But at least, which is some very good sources. So before I start that, I just want to make sure everybody is clear about their midterm grade, that they were able to access it, that they knew there was one. If you have any questions about that grade and how it was given, you can always email me, or you can ask right now if you want, not a problem. You have a second assignment that was due on October the 17th, but that was not part of your midterm. I haven't marked, well, I've marked a lot of them actually in short history, but not everybody. So you should have received your, all of your marks for virtually everybody should be up to date right now as we begin the second half of the semester. 7 discussion posts, 2 assignments. The second assignment was not part of course, your midterm. So it was that first assignment worth 15%, and then all of those discussion posts of 1.5% each. That was your midterm. So that's the first half of the semester. The second half is going to be more demanding. I'd like you to just be on notice that the third assignment that's coming is going to be 725 words that you'll be writing, and it will be worth 20%. But then the big assignment, when you really have to, is going to be for the final assignment for 35%. And that's coming, it will be due the second last week of the semester. And there will be an assignment sheet posted soon, and I will go through that with you. But please be aware that that's coming. That's a big part of your mark. And that's when you're really going to have a chance to do some in-depth writing or make a video or do a presentation. So that's all ahead. What else is ahead? Well, I think probably we can get going with the lecture in a moment. There's so much content I want to catch you up on, but I have some good news in terms of the tech in this room that I'd like to alert you to. At last, we have all of the screens working for breakout groups. And it's not perfect yet, but we did do something earlier this week in Global Leader that I was excited about, and we can do this today if we have time, is that there will be groups of 3 or 4 who stand around each screen. And you can actually write on the screens with your finger, there's only one stylus that you can use, and that's over there. So there will be one team that has a stylus they can use, but the rest can use their fingers to write and make notes. And there will be a question or a problem that I will ask you to address based on the lecture. You make your brainstorm notes there, and all of those screens can be viewed up on the video wall. And we can take up what you do individually up there. The only problem today is that only 2 of those screens can be seen up on the wall, not all 5. But we're moving more and more towards the idea, which we haven't really been able to do yet in our classes, is we build towards a great think tank. After my lecture, after our discussion here, time, everybody moves towards the screens to work on things together and get that sense of a real think tank. Everybody's working on a problem together. We see things going up on the screens. We see stuff coming up on the wall, and then we all come back from those screens to take everything up again. So I used to do that in other classes, but we didn't have the touch screens then. Somebody had to plug in their laptop to the screens. Now you can just stand there and it's fun. Okay, so hopefully we can do that in about 45 minutes or so, but we shall see. So that's what's ahead as well. For all of you online, if there's anything you want to say, please say it in the live chat. We can't see you right now. We can't even see your thumbnails. So that's the only way that we're going to be able to move things along today well, is that we can have the map of the world up there for everybody to see. So for all of you online right now, Amber and others, make sure that you can see that map clearly as well. So you want to see the whole wall, and just make sure you have that enlarged in front of you at your end. Well, you know what I need to do? I need to go write something. Just a second. So I'm going out. Alec? Oh, yeah, let's talk about that in a moment because I just want to see. Watch, I'm going to do this with my finger. Let me try something here. It's supposed to be brush mode. Okay, so watercolor or oil painting. Okay, watercolor, oil. Okay, so here we go. Oil painting. Short, oh, just a second. Oil painting, and we'll do nice and, how about goldy, reddish, short. And it has to dry, right? Short history. Oops. Short his, but I can't erase, so short his story. That's all right. It is my story. So that's not bad. Short his story of the go away world. Yeah. And I got to put a little star in there. Okay. Done. You see, whenever I can remove technology, I will. So we don't need a stylus. We just go back to the hand. Remember the importance of writing? And your hand writes things. Yeah, that's a power. Right, so that's working. Finally, let's take a little check-in with our International Space Station and see where we are live. Essentially, it's black. That is the live view from the International Space Station, a camera looking down at the planet as we go in orbit around the planet. And the reason it's dark is because right now the space station is over Mongolia or China, Inner Mongolia. China, okay, but there's also Mongolia and China. So Inner Mongolia, China? Well, that's interesting in terms of the definition there, but that's live. So I'm going to leave that up there, even though it's a dark screen, because you're getting a live view of planet Earth from a space station and its altitude right now is, how high is it up there? Elevation, 416.3 kilometers up into the atmosphere. And it's moving at 7.6677 kilometers per second, which means how fast is the space station moving kilometers per hour? Do the math. Let's see how quickly. I came up on the 407 today in my car, and I was driving at 100 and, I better not say this, at one point, I was at 160 kilometers an hour. I'm not going to say anything to anybody. Yeah, so, but I was really at 140. I was driving at maximum speed at one, and then I was getting angry at some of the trucks that won't move into the proper lane where they should be, you know, but anyways. 24 to 26, so let's say about 24,000 kilometers an hour. The space station is moving in orbit around, so get this into your heads if you can do it. I was moving fast on the 407 at 160. And that's illegal. You have 416 kilometers into the sky right now, going around the planet, a machine that is moving at about 24,000 kilometers per hour. So that's pretty fast. And that's why this takes about 90 minutes to go around the planet as an orbit. So it's going around the planet constantly through the day. What's that, Sai? Well, yes and no. Sai asked the question, aren't they, meaning the Americans, decommissioning the ISS? Yes, there has been some serious talk about that, but we'll see who wins the next presidential general election next week. Now, I think we can start the lecture. I just wanted to make clear what's up on the dashboard. But why don't we take a moment, just a very few moments, to just address this historic election next week. Then we're going to start picking up where we left off last week, 399 BCE, when Socrates, remember, in the prison around Athens, made that fateful decision that has been speaking down through the ages to so many generations and so many societies, that decision to take his own life for the cause of liberty rather than live in a society that the Spartans were increasingly governing after they defeated the Athenians in the Peloponnesian War. He did not want to live in an increasingly what we would call totalitarian state. Now, I mention this word totalitarian because I'm also going to mention something else before we talk about the history in the United States next week. There is a term that has been used that I hope you will never forget. And I should write it up there, but we'll do that later. It's called the totalitarian temptation. Now, let me just explain this, then you will understand why I've mentioned this at this point when there will be a historic election next week in the United States. The totalitarian temptation is a term that was used by historians and social critics in the 20th century when they were trying to understand what happened to humanity during that century. We will get there later in the semester. We're moving towards the 20th century, which is a hugely dramatic time. But there were people trying to understand, how is it that in spite of all of this technological and sort of growth in some human rights leading up to the 20th century, when there were people saying there will never be wars again. The way that we've had wars before that were so destructive, we're never going to have terrible wars anymore in the 20th century because the wars will be too destructive. And people even wrote books about this, you know, the war to end wars. That's happened in the past. And yet, sure enough, humanity fell into two savage conflicts, the First and Second World Wars, in which totalitarian empires rose, and we had to fight them. The greatest totalitarian adversary we have ever faced, of course, was Adolf Hitler in the Second World War. But there was another one, Joseph Stalin, in the Soviet Union. This is whom Vladimir Putin deeply admires. Vladimir Putin is the current Russian leader, and he has secured power for life for himself. Okay, so he has invaded another country called Ukraine, and he's made it very clear that he wants to continue that war. There was General Franco of Spain. There was Benito Mussolini of Italy, who said, people are tired of freedom. These men created totalitarian states. Spain, Italy, Germany, and then the Soviet Union. Well, historians tried to understand, why are we doing that? Well, some said because humans are tempted to have the strong men in power who build this cult of personality around themselves. And they say that all power should rest with them, that you should spy on your own families. You should be able to kill for that savior. Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, Donald Trump. Do you know that J.D. Vance, his running mate, the vice presidential running mate with Donald Trump right now, said 2 years ago, just to show you what an opportunist and how dangerous this moment is, he said this as a joke. Donald Trump is America's Hitler. He said Donald Trump is cultural heroin. He comes in and he says, I'm going to fix everything. And everybody is lying. And if you don't join me, then you're against me. Right now, in the United States of America, they are facing a historic choice. When you see these things pass through your social media feed, or when you find out things that are happening in the world, please stop and think more deeply now about what's going on. We have a choice in the great democratic superpower on planet Earth. There is no more power like the United States in the world right now, for better or for worse. They are the richest, they are the militarily strongest, they are the culturally most expansive nation, and we all live in reaction, largely, to the United States. It's truth. There are international students here who come because they want the Canadian dream. They want opportunities. Well, that's similar to the American dream, which is land of opportunity, land of freedom. Well, guess what? Next week, the Americans have a choice. They can elect for the first time in history a woman. That's never been done. In the 250 years or so of the history of the American Republic, they've never had a woman, even though other nations have had women as leaders. India, Indira Gandhi. Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto. We could go on in terms of the leaders, but never the United States. Now they have their chance. But it's very, very close because Donald Trump is running against her. And if he wins, it will be the first time in American history that a presidential candidate who lost an election, and has come back to regain power. That's never happened. In addition to that, when he lost the election, he said, it was stolen from me. In 51 or 52 different courtrooms around the United States where his election has been challenged, he has lost every single time. He lied. He created a story, and he knew what he was doing. This is what totalitarians do. There are people that were working with him who began to set up the idea that the election would be stolen long before he lost that election. They have been convicted, and they are in jail because they admitted that they made this up, that they created fake electors. And there were people who went to the Capitol building on January 6th and tried to change the government. They attacked the building. They killed people. This idea in American history of tearing down the government violently is not new. There have been assassinations of presidents. And then in the 1990s, you may not remember this, there was a young man named Timothy McVeigh, a young American soldier, now back from the army, who decided he hated the government so much that he went and he bombed a government building in Oklahoma and killed more than 200 people, and he was eventually caught and executed for his crimes. Beware, please beware, that next week something important is going to happen, and on Wednesday morning we will wake up with a decision. I want you to understand that this idea of totalitarianism, the cult of personality, a strong man who emerges and says he will do this, and then says the media are lying, you're lying, everybody is against me, is exactly what people like Benito Mussolini, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and then it goes all the way back to Julius Caesar, who tried to become a dictator in the Roman Empire, and he was eventually assassinated by his own senators. 44 BCE. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. It's a huge moment. Julius Caesar, height of the Roman Empire, returns from the defeat of the Gauls and the great Gauls in France. Vercingetorix, the great Gaul king, he brings in and executes him in front of all the Romans. And then he says, I want power for life. The Roman Republic is done. No more Roman Republic. There was a Roman Republic. I'm going to tell you about that. He tried to seize the power all for himself, and he said, I'm going to fix all of your problems. And he eventually was assassinated. The totalitarian temptation is not to be underestimated in the story of humanity. As I begin today's lecture, really begin, I'm going to ask you to search your hearts for a little bit. I want you to think, how important is it for you that in the hardest decisions in your life, you are the one who has to make those decisions? Or would you rather have your father make them for you? Would you rather have a policeman, a general, somebody really apparently tough who comes in and cleans up the streets, gets rid of the drug addicts, takes all the homeless away, puts up a wall around the society, keeps all the immigrants out so it's nice and safe and secure? Would you like safety and security in your life more than messy freedom? Please don't answer. Just think. Some of you, if you really are honest with yourself, will say, yeah, the world is really messed up. I'm not so sure I want these Filipinos around me and this Chinese guy and this Jew and this brown guy over here. It's too much of this. Let's get them back to where they came from already. Let's clean this all up and take us back to that nice simple time when things weren't so complicated. There were the black people, and they were inferior, and they were slaves. And if a man displays any sign of femininity, not a warrior, not tough, something's wrong with that person. Maybe we'll just kind of keep him out of our world. How wonderful it would be to go back to when everything is so simple. And you might want that. Just think. Okay. In 399 BCE, we established last week. When you look at the map of the world, which you're going to be doing quite a bit today, before we look at a video or begin to talk and go into groups, please focus on Greece, the Greek peninsula. Focus on the Mediterranean Sea. And I'll try and enlarge this a little bit so we can kind of bring this. Let's bring this up a little bit more. This is not completely to scale. But there we go, okay? Good. It's not even marked Mediterranean Sea, but you can see where it is. It's dead in the middle. We have Greece, we have Turkey. You can see over there, there's Italy. The Mediterranean Sea is where so much of this story that we're telling now is unfolding, because the power in the world, the idea of social progress, and also the corruption of societies that reach too far starts to happen increasingly in the countries around this sea that form. In 399, as I mentioned last week, Socrates decided that he was ready to take his own life for the sake of liberty. I'm going to kind of fast forward a little bit for you today so I can tell more of this story quickly for you, so you can understand how societies and empires begin to rise and fall. When we talk about the ancient world, we can definitely talk about ancient China and ancient India and the Americas and what was taking place in Africa. But it's important first that we really understand the Greco-Roman world. Greece and Rome. They are the two most important powers when we talk about ancient world history. The Greeks eventually were defeated. The idea of the kind of freer world was gradually replaced by a new power. And that's the power I really want to talk about most today as I take you towards the conquest and other developments. I'm going to try and cover a period of around from 399 up until 1492. It's a long period. Yes. Yes, go ahead. Yeah. Take a microphone and we'll start.
How much of the Trojan War was true?
Well, we have Homer's account, who was the first Greek epic poet who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. They're very important classics in Greek literature, hundreds of years before we had Aristotle, Plato, and others like Aristophanes and Euclid and many other Hesiod and many other important Greek thinkers. Homer was the first who was writing about the Trojan War. And we believe that the Trojan War definitely took place because we have accounts, eyewitness accounts from some of the very early Greeks who were writing, but then it was immortalized by Homer in the Iliad and then the Odyssey as well, but largely the Iliad, which begins with, it's interesting you ask about the Trojan Wars because the Iliad, which was written in around 800 BCE, opens with a plague. There was actually a plague among the Greek soldiers who were ready to invade Troy, and this delayed their invasion then. We know it happened, Shem. We know it happened, but like a lot of writing that has been done by Greeks down the centuries, there may have been some embellishment. So last week, for example, when I read you Plato's account of Socrates' death, that is true, that happened, but did every detail happen the way we say? Maybe Plato, in his account, was romanticizing a little bit his mentor's sort of behavior in those final hours, where he portrays him as this humble, very resolute scholar and thinker who's prepared to go to his death without any animosity. He's ready to die gracefully, if you will, in a most humble way because he believes so deeply in what he did. Maybe Socrates was a little bit angry during that time. Maybe he refused to take the hemlock and he was pushed at him. Who knows? But we know that he had to drink hemlock and take his own life because that's what you were given when you were being executed in those periods. You would have to drink hemlock. And we know he was. He had to take his own life as well because of his actions. Okay, so yes, take it sometimes with a little grain of salt, but the actual event did take place. Just question maybe some of the accounts might be a little bit embellished. Okay, or it's written by the victor, exactly, which is what we often see. Josiah, make sure make sure the microphones get around so everybody can hear, and go ahead.
Yeah, the Trojan War probably probably a war with somewhere that would be known as Troy did take place, but it probably wasn't 10 years, and it probably didn't involve the mythological figures or parts of other Greek myths that were then made
But
an inherent part of that story in the Iliad.
we don't know for certain, but we do know for certain that there was a giant apparatus, a horse, this a wooden horse that was put in front of Troy and the walls of Troy, and the Trojans thought it was some kind of gift or something that would assist them. They opened the gates. This huge apparatus is wheeled in, and then they open it, and of course, out come the enemy soldiers who destroy that city-state at that time. Josiah?
It is important to recognize, though, that the Trojan War probably happened some point before the Bronze Age collapse.
Before
The Bronze Age collapse.
okay.
After the Bronze Age collapse, Greece kind of had a period where they didn't really do writing, where a lot of their big cities were just left empty, where it kind of almost regressed. Not that I really see it as like regressing is that simple, but it wasn't like the same way as it used to be. And so and this was before a lot of the city-states we come to think of with Greece, like Sparta and Athens, really preacher things. This before a lot of the Greek thinkers and philosophers started writing everything down. And so and this was even before a lot of the myths were made. And
Well, remember, and
so a lot of
Yeah, go ahead.
myths, a lot of the famous Greek myths were then made to be taken in their glory days. A lot of stories were made of the days before the Bronze Age collapse.
well, I'd like you to help the students understand a little bit, because you've mentioned the Bronze Age collapse, and it's something that we should just briefly touch on before we move on, because I really want to talk about Rome today and why it's so important that we understand a critical moment which began the collapse of Rome as a superpower. But first, what do you mean by Bronze Age collapse? Josiah, do we have a question? Okay, do we know for certain that Romans came from Troy? Well, we'll come to that later, okay? Thanks. Yeah, I just don't want to get too being pulled in too many directions right now, but thanks. I'll come to that, Alex, okay? Thanks. Josiah, go ahead.
Bronze Age collapse was something happened probably around 12th century BC, where a lot of the big civilizations of the Bronze Age, with international trade, with things, a lot of the Mediterranean and other states kind of just fell apart due to a lot of different reasons.
Yep.
There was economic problems with, I think it was the Phoenicians, who were like the big center of trade. Like they had economic issues that kind of fell apart. There are things, I think there were some plagues. A lot of things happened that just led to the various civilizations just a little.
Sure. Well,
So just following for a little bit.
let me stop you for a sec. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the many theories is that there is a thing called the Sea Peoples, because there's historical records of invasions from groups that are now known as the Sea Peoples that led to a big war and led to some of these things being destroyed. We don't really know who the Sea Peoples were.
Well, we're learning more. We're always learning more, but I want to address one thing that's important from our story standpoint. The history of human society has a lot to do with the resources. Bronze was the material that many of these advanced societies were using to create weapons and other materials that gave them more power. Remember, our story that we've been exploring this semester in A Story of Humanity, I've been trying to show you, is breakthroughs towards greater and greater power for ourselves. And I've shown you how it's embedded in the way we developed our own body, the way we evolved, the way we developed our limbs, the brain size, the complexity of our body over time through evolution has given us the power to dominate the rest of the natural world. Well, bronze was something that we humans made. We didn't discover. And this is important in understanding something about our power. Okay? I'm not going to address so much the collapse of the Bronze Age, but what's important is to understand in terms of our story and about power. I touched on agriculture, and I think I mentioned, or I may have gone too fast over this, how corn was developed. Did we cover that at all? I'll just mention it briefly because I had to go so fast. Corn is not a natural thing. Humans created it from picking what's called teosinte. It's a corn-like thing. And early on in the Americas, the American women, farmers, this is what's going to lead to the growth of the great American empires like the Aztecs and the Maya and others that we will see, is they had maize, they had corn. Well, corn is not natural. Teosinte was picked, brought back to the farm, tested, and gradually it was developed into corn over time. Well, so was bronze. Copper and tin are what bronze come from. Copper is in the what? Copper is a natural element. Tin is a natural element. Humans come along and they take copper and tin and they play with this. There's bronze. Oof. Look at the power now. It's a better material than copper, better than tin. This is what we do, we humans. Well, eventually, Josiah, we discovered something else, which is we began to see that there is a thing called iron. we got iron, which is a natural element. And so then we get the Iron Age. And then eventually we're going to figure out, how do you take iron and you put carbon together and you get steel? Now we have the Steel Age. What's coming next? You don't have to answer that. But what you need to understand is that we humans are constantly manipulating the natural world to give us more stuff. This is our story. Let's come back to the moment when we start to see something happen, when the Romans begin to move in to the Mediterranean world, and they begin to expand and grow and become the first superpower in ancient history. Many people today are looking at the United States and asking, is the United States in the twilight of its power? Are they flirting with dictators and tyrants in the form of Donald Trump in just the same way that the Romans did with Julius Caesar? Because when Julius Caesar came, afterwards, everything changed for Rome and the Republic ended. Let me explain. We won't go to the plague. We're going to move on to Athens right now, and I'm going to bring you Plutarch. Plutarch is one of the most important Roman historians. Many ancient classical historians will study Plutarch to understand what the Roman leaders were thinking. Today, I have two very important historians to help us understand something about the Roman Empire. Plutarch, who was an eyewitness, and Edward Gibbon, in The Great Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, who was writing many centuries later, trying to understand what led to the Roman Empire's collapse. But let's first orient ourselves around the map for a moment to understand something about Rome, okay? So let's look at the Mediterranean Sea again. Now, if you look at Italy, the boot, think back to about 2,700 years ago. This is 300 years before the golden age of Athens. There was a little town called Rome. Rome began as a village. And essentially, as the Greek Empire was beginning to grow and Athens was becoming the dominant naval power in the Mediterranean and was spreading its power around the Mediterranean, Rome, the village, was slowly growing through military conquest. And essentially, the Roman legions, as they would eventually be called, were similar to the Greek hoplites, whom you saw last week, except they went further with the idea of a society that would be built on military conquest. And before long, the village of Rome had spread its power and had begun to occupy many more towns and villages, spreading all across Italy and all across the Mediterranean. And eventually, Rome challenged Greece. Rome challenged the powers of the Mediterranean, the Carthaginians or the Phoenicians in the Punic Wars, as Alec had mentioned, the Phoenicians, the great trading empire of the Mediterranean, who also established their own empire in the lower Mediterranean. They would confront the Romans too in the Punic Wars. Hannibal, the great Carthaginian general who took his elephant, and crossed the mountains in Europe and got very close to confronting Rome at the beginning of its power, he would eventually be defeated. Through a series of great military conquests, Rome became the dominant power, establishing its culture and its language all along the Mediterranean. Now, In 44 BC, there's a moment that all of you probably are familiar with, but I want to explain this a little bit better for you. There was a murder that happened in Rome, the city of Rome. We're not 44 BCE. The capital of Rome, the Roman Empire, has about 1 million people in it. It was the New York of its day. There are these incredible engineered aqueducts bringing fresh water in, very meticulously engineered aqueducts that just gently slope by just tiny degrees for miles and miles so that water could be brought from miles away, fresh water into the Roman capital. So you'd have these beautiful fountains going all over of fresh water. People could have their baths, all these public baths, and there were theaters there. Colosseum of 80,000 people would come, this big event, to watch all sorts of very entertaining events, naval battles recreated, but also, of course, gladiatorial conquests. All of this hegemony, as we call it, in Rome, was built on a republic. For 700 years, Rome had said, we don't want kings. We don't want monarchs. They killed them. They got rid of them. They did what the Greeks did. You may not realize this. We often talk a lot about the idea of freedom and liberty in terms of the golden age of Athens, but the Romans were also building a republic too. But then along came an individual cut from largely the same cloth as many of the other generals and leaders of that time, grown up in the Republic, who was a very good general, a very good warrior, a very good propagandist. He wrote about his military victories. He did what King Ramses did in Egypt and all of the other god kings had done. He glorified his power through writing about it, through the art that he presented. He said, I am a god. I want to be treated like a god. I have won military victories for you. I defeated Vercingetorix, the terrible Gaul king. Gaul was France, what is now France. Eventually, Rome will defeat them. I'm talking about Julius Caesar. Now, if I were showing my slides right now, I would be presenting to you some really powerful images of Julius Caesar. But I'm going to stop because I want to show you the first video of something to help you to understand. This idea of the spell of the God King, the totalitarian temptation, the idea that even when we have freedom, and even when we achieve much with our freedom, we may still fall into the temptation for some greater leader to come and make everything just right for us. I want to show you a video. For those of you watching online, could you go to DC Connect right now and open up the folder for class 7? Okay, and I'm going to show you, and I'm going to take you actually to another part of the world to help you to understand something about the spell of the God King. For those of you, just a second, watching, let me come back here. Alex and Jonathan and Carlos and others, I will get to your point later, Alex, could you just make sure that you tell me in the live chat right now that you have accessed what's called the first emperor in the DC Connect folder for class 7, because I want you to watch this, but I'm going to give you a time code for where to go to see something important about this. So excellent, Amber, thanks. Amber, could you just shuttle right now to 58:53 of that video, but don't run it yet, okay? So 58:53. And when you've frozen there on it, let me know, okay? Good. Okay, let me come back. Excellent. 58:53. Good. For all of you, I'm not going to put the map up, it's just too complicated. The spell of the God King is something that led to the end of the Roman Empire. It was when the Romans decided they wanted a dictator. They didn't want freedom in its very simplest form. I want to take you to a video that shows this process in another part of the world. As a matter of fact, the idea of the spell of the God King is something that has been there in many human societies. I'm going to take you to China. I'm going to take you to the beginning of the Chinese Empire and the first emperor, and his name was Shi Huangdi. He's essentially the creator of China as we know it. Now, the reason I'm doing this before we come finally to Rome to understand it is I'm trying to help you to understand what this idea of spell of the God King means. We talked about awakenings of power. That's awakening to the fact that we can rule ourselves. But as it happens in human society, that power of freedom, democracy, is actually fragile. It's not strong. We have not had democracy for very long in the human story. We might lose it again. That's what I'm trying to help you to understand. And we may start losing it, we may, through what is happening in the United States. Now, you might ask, well, what is this thing called the spell? What is this thing called the God King? Well, you've already seen that in the early human societies with Gilgamesh, for example, and the Egyptian pharaohs, and you might have thought that, well, they were kind of ancient, and we moved past that. No, we haven't. We experimented, as we are now, with democracy. But as it happens in most human societies, it has been something like what you're about to see with Shi Huangdi. About 2,400 years ago in China, there was a general who came to power, Shi Huangdi, kind of like Julius Caesar, kind of like Alexander the Great, as you're going to see a little bit later. And he was brutal. He was a warrior, and he won wars against many different warring factions or tribes. And he united these tribes into a single nation called China. And he said, I, your leader, have a mandate from heaven. This became the term that the Chinese used early on. This is exactly what we see today happening in modern China with Xi Jinping and the Communist Party. I am your leader. Mao Zedong, who was the originator of the communist totalitarian state in China today. China gave us the idea of an emperor. It will happen later with Rome and others, but China was the first. let's take a look in this video of who Shi Huangdi was. Now, I've asked Amber, and I've also fast forwarded to the best part. This is a docudrama that appeared on television. I've cut out all the cheesy, dramatic parts and just given you the documentary parts with an interesting scholar from Cambridge University to understand who Shi Huangdi was. He was the one who began to build the Great Wall of China, which is the biggest engineering project in ancient history. He also built a mausoleum for himself. It's called a necropolis. It's an underground world where he buried himself. And his body has still not been brought out yet, even though we think we know where exactly it is. I want to show you through this documentary portion and a little bit of documentary or drama, just the extent of this person's power. And I'd like you to just think about the spell of the God King part. When I say spell, I mean more than just a duration of time. Spell can be a duration of time. Spell is also, you get sort of touched and you're under the spell of something. You're almost drugged. I think human beings in our story have to be careful. We can easily fall under the spell of the totalitarian. Beware. And just watch the extent of this power. So Amber and everyone else, please go ahead and start watching at 58:53. You're going to see a professor from Cambridge University in a library in Cambridge talking about a manuscript that he's found about Shi Huangdi's power. And then I will explain after. So go ahead and start running it. For all of you, I'm going to run it for you here. And hopefully this will work the way it is supposed to today. And here it is. We've got audio is up. Just a second. Here we go. 58:53. It opens in a library. I love libraries. Here's Library at Cambridge. Well, I want you to just think for a moment of that the final line of Jeremy Irons' narration. Jeremy Irons is the actor doing the narration on that. It's quite good. Yes. I heard something like that, but we've also had a similar story around the Dead Sea Scrolls in Israel of a young a farmer's son who fell into a hole and a little cave and found the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's possible, Alec. I don't know for certain. Yeah. Let's just come back here for a second and try to understand. For all of you, Amber, were you able to watch it and also stop it? Just want to make sure you're back with us. Excellent. Good, Alex. Thanks. We have 15 minutes left, so we're not going to go into groups, but we're going to move the content. But I have a big question to ask you before we come to Rome. Why don't they want to disturb his spirit? What's the problem? The Egyptians went into their great ruins and Valley of the Kings and found Tutankhamun, travel the world, King Tut, King Ramses. I could have shown you a picture of him. I didn't because I didn't have time. Of his body, King Ramses the Great, lying in Egypt today in a museum. Did I show you the picture? No, yeah, because I had to move. With his ginger-colored hair, there he is, the great Pharaoh, God King of Egypt, lying as a corpse today in a museum in Cairo. The real one, preserved so well because of the mummification process. So what's going on with the Chinese here? Why don't they just go and get him? Remember, we're talking about the spell of the God King. I don't want to go default yet, but I can. Okay, I just want to make sure we got the default here. As long as you're okay, everybody, if I go default, but I want to give everybody a chance to interact. But some would rather not, and that's okay. That's not a problem. Okay, don't feel any pressure. Let's start over here. Okay, grab the microphone and let's work on this for a moment, and then I'm going to come and read you something from Plutarch and Julius Caesar. Go ahead.
It's sacred to them, and like they don't want to disturb him. Like they don't want to disturb the spirit that he may have.
And what might that spirit be?
It may be an evil spirit.
Oh, he's not wrong. Have any of you seen the terracotta warriors before? Did you know of them? The 9,000 or so life-size terracotta statues of individual Chinese warriors, actually sculpted to the exact features of a real soldier who stood for the sculptor while he created that terracotta warrior. Do you know why those terracotta warriors were created in the first place? For Shi Huangdi's necropolis? So, soldiers in the afterlife? Sai? Yeah, soldiers in the for what purpose? Justin?
I guess it's like to protect their leader.
Yeah, to protect him. How about maybe Shi Huangdi felt he needed protection in the afterlife because there might be some enemies who want to exact their retribution for the cruelty of his regime, and he wants to be safe. The Egyptians in their Great Pyramids had nowhere near the number of soldiers. So you take your army with you and you make them look exactly like they were in life. So they're there with you for Alec, go ahead. It's something about the spell of the God King going on here, guys, that I'm trying to help you to understand, because the Romans are going to really grapple with this with Julius Caesar. Yes.
So with the terracotta army, there was two theories. One was, like you said, protection in the afterlife against
Protection.
enemies and such. But another person said, if he was such a great king and such a great emperor, why would he need protection? So the second theory was to conquer the afterlife, to then grow as a bigger or more powerful emperor beyond life.
We're still looking into these things to understand exactly why, but we
Yes.
know that in very recent times, we've only discovered these terracotta warriors in the last 50 years or so.
And the reason they don't open the tomb is the two reasons. One, as you said, because they fear an evil spirit. But two is also because of the extreme amount of mercury. If there is mercury in there, it would be very toxic and poisonous.
That too. But the spirit. Again, I come back to this idea for all of you to understand is, do you think that we humans like to have these kinds of figures organizing our societies for us, telling us what's right and wrong, so that we can be secure and safe? But we're definitely not free, but we're safe. And that God King, Divine King, tells us he will protect us. That's exactly what is scandalous in the news today. If you've been following, Donald Trump said yesterday, all you women, I'm your protector. He didn't just say it about women, he used the word, I'm your protector. Do any of you want in your life to have a protector? Let's see. Hold on. Let's see if you're a little bit under the spell of the God King. Let's see. Reach a little bit deep now and look into your heart a little bit, and let's see. And don't you want somebody to help you with the messiness of freedom and difficult things? And if there's an enemy, somebody who threatens you, a bully, a bad bully who says nasty things about you online, or comes and even has the courage to confront you in the hallway and says you're a bag of nothing, wouldn't you like to have, if you don't have the courage yourself, a nice, strong person who will make sure that that bully never even bothers you in the first place? Wouldn't you like that? And then everything is nice and secure and safe. And Alec? Exactly. That's what they promise. It's something the opposite. Sham? Make sure you say it in the mic so the guys online can hear, okay?
I feel like we've been trending towards like giving up freedom for safety recently. I mean, isn't that what the Patriot Act is about in the States? The Patriot Act.
Yes,
It's about giving, like after 9/11. it's
absolutely secure.
About giving up like
Freedoms, yes,
for
for
in
security.
exchange for security, or at
Absolutely.
least like a sense of security.
Good question. I'm not saying that there's one or the other, Sham, that either you're free or you're secure. It's a constant tension for us in human society. How much security do we need? And then in that, how much freedom are we giving away? But we have to be careful. We have to be careful that when we start to give away more and more of our freedoms, we could be giving a person like a God King to fill that vacuum. That's what we have to be careful about. Because if that vacuum's there will be God Kings that will come in and fill it and try to convince you that they can protect you. Beware of that vacuum. That's what I'm trying to. Now, I can help prove this and drive this point home a little bit more with understanding the mindset of the Romans around Julius Caesar and what came after. And I'll just touch on that and then we'll finish. But go ahead, okay? Yes.
As it shows, history tends to repeat itself. And it's like from what we're seeing in the media, it looks like it's trending towards that way, where people are starting to just because the way Donald Trump brings up immigration and all this stuff, people tend to fear. So now I think they see him as a protector and as a provider, where when in reality he's putting up a front.
Beware of that language, protection provider. Exactly. And it's a great point. I want to make sure there's somebody who is okay to go right on the board, because there's something that just is very important to write, and I want to stay here. So who was the writer before that didn't mind writing something that would go over there, that can write clearly and likes forget it. It takes too long. I'll tell you what it is, and you imagine what's on that. Okay, for now, Josiah, go ahead and take a slide. Here's what I'd like you to think about, and then we'll move on. For all that we know, what have we learned? Josiah, do you want to just take another slide? So put your finger down at the bottom, at the right at the right, and see those two little lines? Put your finger on those two little, yeah, exactly. And then take the stylus on the right-hand side, and then just write as large as you can, okay? For all that we know, what have we learned? When you leave the class today, and increasingly in the weeks to come, as we gain more knowledge together and we explore more about this story of humanity on planet Earth, please ask yourself, what are we learning? We might be knowing more, but are we really learning? And if we're not learning, then yes, we will go back and make the same mistakes. So think about, what are we learning? For all that we know, what have we learned? Okay, that's good. Write it as large as you can. Rub, yeah, exactly. Keep going, and then it will be there. I want to end with the Romans. And I want to read you something about the beginning of the fall of the Roman Republic. Plutarch is one of our most important ancient Roman historians. He was there. He saw. Great, Josiah, thanks. I love bringing sources in that are eyewitnesses. It's a wonderful book, Eyewitness to History, that I'd like to read parts to you from at some other time. A journalist in Britain has tried to find as many sources going all the way back in ancient history of people who were living during that time and writing about it to give us an eyewitness account. The first person he uses is Thucydides, the great Greek historian, writing about the plague that afflicted Athens and led to the death of Pericles, and eventually the defeat of the Athenians by the Spartans. Sources of information in my lectures are absolutely critical. Sources for you should be critical too. Whenever you bring information to people and you want to tell them what happened, please ask yourself, is the source trusted? Is the source independent? Do they have any vested interests? Are they trying to convince me of something, sell me something, change my mind, mess me up? Or are they scholars who only care about bringing me the best possible information they have, and even better, that they're telling me as an eyewitness, because they've been there, as accurately as they can, what did they see? What did they hear? What did they smell? And then, if I have a source like that, I think I can begin to trust that source. We live at a time where you are getting a lot of your information from sources of entertainment. It shatters me to think that 40% of young people today are getting their news from TikTok. That's a fact. I am not anti-technology. You know that. I love technology. I will use it as best as I can, but it depresses me to think that students and young people and even grown-ups are scrolling through TikTok day after day and saying, that's my information about the world. Little bite-sized things, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and then you move on to something else. This is not good for humanity and for critical thinking. And I want to make sure I give you good sources. Alec? 39% was the latest figure of apparently, and I have to check that source, are getting their news about what's happening in the world first from TikTok or from Instagram. They're not even reading newspapers, magazines. They don't really go deep into anything anymore. That's scary. Alec?
I agree with you with the fact that that's scary, but do you believe that that could be also due to the fact that a lot of people have lost trust in most media outlets today?
Yes, Alec, I do. Very good point. It's incumbent upon me to come into this class and bring you good sources that I trust, even though I could probably question the veracity, a little bit of Jeremy Irons' narration in that docudrama. I might be able to question some of it, but I come out of the world of journalism, reporting. I wrote for newspapers and magazines. I made television documentaries. I ran a production company and made television series. I understand that there are actually a lot of people who are reporting on the world who are not corrupted, who are trying to tell you exactly what happened because they care. And if you think that a lot of the information cannot be trusted, well, then I would ask you a question. Can you be trusted? Do you think you can be trusted, Alec?
No.
I kind of disagree. I think that you can because you're a critical thinker, but you make mistakes. But you're driven by what? When you want to tell people about something, are you driven by a desire to share information that you think is good, or are you driven by something else where you want to manipulate and gain power over them? The next time you find yourself saying, I don't trust anything, well then ask yourself if you trust yourself. And probably you will say you do, although you may question yourself. But deep down, you believe that you are fundamentally pretty good and your intentions are good. Well then, if you feel that way, don't you think there are many other people who feel that way too? Don't you think there are reporters, scholars, and filmmakers and others who care about bringing you good information, not about manipulating you? Alec?
As much as I agree with you, if we, for example, just took a reporter, brought him into a room and offered him $50 million to change his story to something different, do you think they would take it?
I have to think about that.
Exactly.
The reason I'm spending time on this is because I'm going to save this for the beginning of next week. Plutarch was an eyewitness. He was writing 2,100 years ago. He was living during the time of Roman emperors. And he has some fascinating things to say about them that I'd like you to hear, that will help you to understand something about the totalitarian temptation, spell of the God King, and the fall of the Roman Republic, and why Rome decided they wanted a dictator. I'll save that for next week. Maybe next week, when we come back on Friday, we will not be in this very uncomfortable position of me reading from Plutarch, telling us, beware of the tyrants, and Donald Trump is the new president. Then we have a big, interesting new development. But we'll see next week. So thanks for being patient as always with the tech, and did my best, and I'm here if you need me, okay? Discussion post number 8, remember, for everybody, and for those of you online, if you want your full marks, 3 out of 3, you need to do the full explanation. Thanks, Alec. And we'll do Repair Cafe next week, okay? Thanks. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to shut my microphone now.